Today's trash bot build is inspired by crustaceans. And I know that there are a lot more crustaceans out there than just crabs and lobsters, but their features translate the best into robotics, so that's why I'm using them. With many of my builds, there's usually one piece that I find that I build everything around. This one was a little harder as I was going off of the inspiration of a crab and a lobster. But eventually I did find this piece here, which was the handle off of some toy, and I'm going to build everything from here. I decided I would make this the torso, and I'm going to cut off the end pieces here just to make it a bit smaller. I'm already starting with a much larger piece than I usually start with, so this entire bot is going to be larger than most of my other ones. One of the things I've learned with building these somewhat larger scale bots, at least for me, is that sometimes you just have to put pieces together and then worry about filling in the spaces in between later. This part here is going to be the abdomen, but as you can see, it's just a bit too wide compared to the upper torso, so I'm just going to use the front end of it and then I'll figure out how to cover up the back later. I'll connect these two pieces with armature wire and plenty of super glue. This has to be a pretty strong connection as this is the connection point between basically the entire upper half and the entire lower half, which you'll see as this bot develops, those two halves are not equal by any means. One is definitely a lot larger than the other. For the chest plate, I'm going to use this rounded cap off of this coffee creamer container, and I'm just going to cut it off, and I will modify it later a bit more, but I'm just showing you where it's going to be placed for now. This open part in the middle, as well as the two holes on either end, need to be filled with something, and the back of the abdomen here also needs to be filled. And for that, I'm going to use Milliput, which is a two-part epoxy putty. I mix up two chunks of it together into a workable clay, and then I can fill in those spaces. Because this is a larger area to cover, I'm using Milliput because it gives me a couple hours of working time versus EP200 or EP400, which is another epoxy putty that I use quite regularly, which only gives me about 10 to 20 minutes of working time. With Milliput and EP200, I can use isopropyl alcohol to smooth out the surface. I'll clean up any excess Milliput in a bit once that's cured, but for now I'm going to start working on the arms. I'm going to be using these pieces here as the arms, and mostly the shoulders though, because I'm going to cut off the top bits with my coping saw. In doing so, it made them a bit too squishy, so I'm going to add a little piece of a broken clip here to bring back some of that sturdiness. Then to cover up those open holes, I'm going to use a bit of super glue and just some EVA foam or craft foam sheets. Not only does this craft foam cover up those holes, but it also gives me a good place to glue some things to later. Once it's in place and the glue has dried, I can cut it flush with a pair of scissors. Another piece of EVA foam is added as a spacer, and then I'll attach this piece of a Gundam on top. Moving on to the rest of the arm, this is a piece of a Transformers toy, and it's going to be the upper arm. I just have to cut off this bit here so it sits flush against the shoulder part. And you can see once I cut that off, it fits against the shoulder a bit better. Here's where the arms start to get a bit different from each other. I'm going to make sort of an exhaust port thing with a couple pieces of an airplane model part, and I'm going to add that to the upper shoulder. For the lower half of the arm, I'm going to use this piece of a finger off of some robotic toy kit thing that I've taken apart. And for the actual claw itself, I'm going to be using more of those Transformers toy pieces. With lobsters, they have a crusher claw and a cutter claw, and this one that I'm building here is the crusher claw. They're usually bigger and more powerful, which makes them very good for crushing things. And the cutters, on the other side, are usually smaller, but have a sharper edge, so they're better for cutting things. And with this robot having a crusher and a cutting claw, it makes me think that it has something to do with demolition, maybe like underwater ship demolition or ship recovery, something like that. What you're seeing me do here is just fill in more of those open spaces with different greeblies and bits that I have in my bits box. And there's the crusher claw, pretty much done. And now I just make the cutter claw on the other side, which is very much the same, except I use a few smaller pieces. And of course, the cutter is different. The cutters in this case are made from some pieces of a Gundam shield that I had. and eventually I'll add in some actual blades, but for now, this is what it looks like. And here are the two side by side. You can really see the difference in the crusher claw there. Moving back to the main body, once that milliput is cured, I'm using a card scraper, which is usually used for woodworking, but in this case, it works well for getting off all of that excess milliput that got spread around when I was smoothing it out with the alcohol. The card scraper gets like 95% of it off, but I do use a bit of sandpaper as well as some Scotch-Brite pads just to smooth everything out completely. And you know, this is starting to remind me of someone. I can almost see a face in here. Anyways, here is how the arms look with the main body, and they'll attach something like this. I'll figure out how to attach them more permanently later. But for now, we're going to move back to building a bit more shape into the main body. I believe this T-shaped piece is from a Transformers toy, and that's where the legs will attach to once I build them. Pulling more inspiration from the lobster, I'm going to add a couple of these small little legs that I made out of a toothpick and some pieces of plastic, and they'll get added to these little frills here on the side of the main body. Once those are in place, I realized I wanted to add some type of booster rocket propeller things to the back. I'm not sure exactly what to call them. Propeller engines, I guess. And so I'm going to make some out of an aluminum tube, as well as these little propeller things that I believe were exactly the thing I'm talking about. They were from some underwater model kit that I took apart a while back. But they fit great in this tube here. Then this little piece of plastic will act as a bracket to hold the engine tube thing, you know what I'm talking about, to the main body. Actually, it's these metal pins that will hold it to the main body, but the metal pins are connected to that bracket, which holds the tube thing. And this is just a dry fit here. I'm going to keep these separate, of course, to make them easier to paint. The main body is almost completely done, and I can start to work on the front chest plate. Using my Dremel tool, I'm going to take off a bit of material so that this actually sits against the front of the body a bit better. And by better, I just mean that it sits flush against the plastic so that there's not as much of a gap in between. Even with that modification, the edges are just too small and won't glue well to the main body. So to bulk up those edges and give a bit more surface area, I'm going to mix up a batch of EP200, which is that quick curing epoxy clay, and I'm going to add a bit of extra surface area. The liquid I just sprayed on there was isopropyl alcohol, and I use that just to act as release agent so that the clay doesn't stick to the main body. I only had a small amount of this epoxy putty left, so I just mixed up the rest of it and I used it to fill in the rest of the front plate. To keep the legs simple, I'm just going to use some Gundam parts and one piece of trash. These legs are going to be almost comically small compared to the rest of the body, and that is on purpose. In a crab, and mostly in lobsters, their legs are much smaller than their body and their pincers. After working on the arms and body for quite a long time, having these legs just basically snap together was quite the nice break. All of these blue parts here came from the same Gundam kit, but I don't actually think they fit together how I'm putting them together. But I don't have the instructions anymore, so no way to tell. The head is made from a spray bottle lid and this resin piece here, and they'll get glued together to give him a little hat. I believe this is a Gundam accessory piece, and it's going to be the start of my face. I add a little plastic cabochon for some detail, and then the eyes are made out of some armature wire, another little piece of plastic toy, and another cabochon on top. The mouthpieces are going to be made from some Final Faction action figure toy pieces that I cut up and added a few pieces of very small wire to make them a bit more sturdy. Then a piece of armature wire will help attach the head to the main body. I make a neck out of the neck of an old bottle, and this is just so that the head is a bit higher and sticks out a bit more. I don't want it to get lost in all of the other armor and plating. At this point, I also cut up a piece of styrene into a few blades that fit into the cutting section of the arm. All of the major building is done, and now I just need to clean up my work desk because this is what it looks like after a couple days of kit bashing. Quite the mess. Ah, that's much better. Now, I don't really like working in a messy space like that, but when you're kit bashing, things just pile up very quickly. And I'm also working in a very small space, so that makes it messier much quicker as well. This guy needed some bedazzling, so I'm adding a bunch of rhinestones all over the place, and this is going to look like rivets once everything is painted. I thought the rivets would look good for this build because they always remind me of like large ships and submarines and things like that, so with this being a semi-aquatic robot, I thought it would fit well, make it feel very nautical. The rivets also just add a nice bit of detail and will help break up all of the color later. While I was adding the rhinestones to the front plate, I decided I would add what is on a crab called the apron. Basically, I gave it a six-pack and pecs. And I'll use my Dremel tool to carve this out. On crabs, you can actually tell if they're male or female based on the size of their apron. The males have very small, thin aprons, and the females have larger, wider aprons because that's where all the eggs are held. Adding this extra detail also gave me a bit more space to add some more rhinestones. After bedazzling this crab bot with quite a few of these rhinestones, I can move to just adding a bit more greebles and other bits to fill out the space and add some detail. With all the parts mocked up like this, you can really see the size of this guy. Compared to last week's video, this guy is definitely on the larger size. It's definitely one of the larger bots I've built recently, but compared to my big bot bash bot from a few months ago, which is the largest one I've ever made, it is still significantly smaller. All the parts are separated and ready for paint, so I'll add them to some paint sticks and send them outside for a coat of primer. For color, I'm going to start with this beige color, and I'm going to use my airbrush to cover basically everything except for the thrusters in the back. That's the word I was looking for. Thrusters, I think that's what they're called. Anyways, this beige is going to go on everything, and this will be the base coat for all of the red, which will come later. The thrusters, which are those engine tube propeller things I was talking about way back ago when I made them, those will be painted in a silver. Moving on to the hand painting, I'm going to be using basically every red that I own in different shades and contrasts, and a couple different sponge brushes. I'll be using a few different photos here of some crabs as reference for the paint job, mostly this crab here. This is sort of what I'm trying to go for with my paint job. You can see the beige in all of the lower areas and the joints, and then the darker red is all of the main faces. I've never painted any sort of crustacean before, so there's a first for everything, I guess. And I'm just sort of going for it and seeing what happens. I start with the darkest red I have, and I'm doing sort of a splotching over the faces of most of the bot, trying to focus mostly on the upper sides and the edges of the pieces, especially these front plates here, which are technically the bottom of the crab. And if you were to look at the bottom of a crab or a lobster, they're much lighter on the bottom than they are on top. Most of the red color on this robot is going to come from those contrast paints. And those are basically transparent colors, and so it's nice that I have a light base to work from because it really makes those colors pop. And because I'm using the sponge brush, I'm just getting that paint on the higher areas, and the lower joints aren't getting any red paint, which is how I want it because in the crab reference photo I'm looking at, the joints are still lighter beige. With this paint job, as sometimes happens, I was not feeling it during the painting process. I was really worried that I had just ruined this paint job and I was going to have to restart. But I told myself to just push through it, see how the weathering looks, and then you can make that decision after we're done if we want to restart. Just gotta keep repeating to yourself, trust the process, trust the process, trust the process. And with this one, it took until the very final stages of weathering before I finally was like, okay, this looks like a crab body. But as they say, as artists, we are our own harshest critics, so let me know what you think. Does this paint job come out as crab-like, lobster-like, or does it just look like a bloodbath. Either way, I think it's a great time to give a huge shout out to my patrons over on my Patreon. Thank you all so very much for the support. It really does mean a lot to me. Thanks for sticking around and supporting this channel and making sure I can continue to paint some crab bots. I had the last few layers of paint here, and I'll quickly show my palette afterwards. It looks like quite the murder scene. So the base layer of color is complete, and I'm just going to give it a clear coat, and then I can start working on the rest of the weathering, which I hope is really going to bring everything together. I start with a gunmetal chipping pen, and I'm going to add some silver back to all of the rivets. With all of the layers of paints, I was really starting to lose those details that I'd added, so by bringing out these colors again, you start to see everything that was all blended together. I painted the eyes black, and I think this is the moment that this paint job really started to come together for me. Before, I couldn't quite focus on the eyes, but now the black really shows that those are the eyes. I also do a bit of finger painting to bring out some of the contrast in those abdomen apron areas, because I went a little overboard on the red. I think these pieces here that I'm painting this gray-blue are the hydraulics, and so I want them to be a bit more contrasted to the rest of the body. I use a different chipping pen to add some actual chipping effects around the bot. This is supposed to look like some of the paint is chipped away and some of the raw metal is exposed underneath. I'm going to mix up my go-to wash here with this gray and brown, but I'm also going to add some of this blood red to give everything a uniform red tint. I mix up a 50-50 ratio, or I guess in this case it's a 33-33-33 ratio, and then I dilute it with water and isopropyl alcohol. Then I do what washes do best, and I wash everything in color. And now I add the rust colors. I'm usually a little scared to start this process because in the past I have the tendency to go a little much when it comes to rusting. So I'm trying to keep everything very thin and light here and just doing layers and adding on top of itself. At the end of the day, I think I did a pretty good job with this rusting. I definitely didn't go overboard, which is good. I'm really glad that I did this layer of rusting because this extra little bit of weathering and contrast really helped bring everything together on this bot. And I think it really helped bring it into the world because if this is a semi-aquatic robot coming in and out of the water a lot, it's going to develop some rust. Speaking of world building, if you all have any ideas of what this bot's job is or what it does or what its name is, I would love to hear about it down in the comment section. In the past, you all have come up with some really great stories for these bots, and I always love reading them. You can really see this rust in effect a lot more when you compare one that hasn't been rusted yet, like this one, to one that has been rusted, like this one. Once I'm done rusting, I can send everything outside to get a coat of clear coat to protect everything, and then I can start working on the base. Because this robot is quite top heavy, big old body and tiny little legs, I need to make a base for him because he's not going to stand up on his own. This is basically the same base I've built for quite a long time now. It's a wooden circle with some foam core board glued to it with some foam safe super glue, and then just some Mod Podge to seal everything in place. These rocks are new to my collection. They're made from plaster using this rock mold that I got from my local hobby shop. In the past, I've used just normal rocks that I stole from outside, and those work great, but the nice thing about these is that they're flat on one side. Why is it nice to be flat like this on one side? Well, in nature, rocks, especially large rocks, don't usually just sit on top of the topsoil or sand or whatever. They're usually half buried or partially buried. So with this being flat on one side, it looks like half the rock is buried under the sand. And that's what I'm going for with this base, sort of a sandy, rocky coastline. This stuff is not actually sand though, it's dirt that I stole from outside and filtered it into smaller dirt. And I'll glue it down by misting it with isopropyl alcohol and then adding more watered down Mod Podge to glue everything in place. The isopropyl alcohol is there to break the surface tension for the glue, so it gets in between all of the sand, or in this case, dirt particles. Once that's dry, I paint it with a black primer and a dusting of white, and then I do this beige base coat. The rest of the painting on this is just going back and forth between washes and dry brushing until I'm happy with the final result. I add a few static grass tufts and then I can paint the sides black to make it look a bit more professional. Then the last thing I have to do is just sort of put everything together and glue it all up. And as we are nearing the end of this video, if you are enjoying it, please do consider dropping a like, consider subscribing, commenting, sharing, all of that fun stuff that helps the YouTube algorithm pick up these videos and show them off to more people. This may be the first crab lobster bot I've ever made, but it's not the first trash bot I've ever made. I've got quite a few other trash bot builds on my channel. So if this has piqued your interest, please go and check those out. I've got quite a few to choose from. Hey, thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. I hope you enjoyed that one. This was definitely a cool video, definitely a trust the process kind of video for me at least. If you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please put them down in the comment section and I will try to get back to you. I do read every single comment and I try to respond if I can. Like I said before, I've got a whole bunch of other videos on my channel, so please do check those out if you're interested. Check out the description for helpful links to tools I use during these videos and my Patreon and all that kind of good stuff. Thank you all so much for watching, and as always, I will see you in the next video.